All right, guys. This week we really start getting into the fun and creative aspects of visual storytelling and really what goes into telling a story using different elements. And so this week we're going to focus on light and composition and what those elements mean when we are taking photos or video and how they really enhance our storytelling capabilities. So, when we think about communicating stories or narratives or just information in a visual form, we have to think of quite a few things. And I really like this quote from the International Film and Television School. And it says, communicating visually in forms that can be read or looked upon. Um, in cinema, a story is most visual when ideas and emotions are expressed through performance and aesthetics as opposed to dialogue. You can portray a lot of information through dialogue or text, but sometimes the emotional aspect or the thing that really captures your attention is through the visual. And lighting and composition are two of the main elements that help give those aesthetics um, more oomph. When you are looking at an image, whether it be still or moving, um, you have to think about what the aesthetic means. And the definition of aesthetic is having a sense of beautiful or a sense of meaning, pertaining to, involving, or concerned with pure emotion and sensation as opposed to pure intellect. And we have to think about, yes, we can learn things, we can um, grow wiser from just text, but what feeling comes with that? And the aesthetic of images really plays an important part in that. Visual storytellers use all sorts of different aesthetic means to really bring a sense of empathy to their audiences, to really make them feel something. It's not just about giving the information, but we want to connect with them. And light does that in a very nuanced way. So it affects our initial perception and interest. Lighting really has an impact on us, and it impacts how we feel emotionally, um, both in pictures and in real life. So think about, you know, a sunset versus being blinded in the middle of the day, or fluorescent lighting versus soft mood lighting. All these things really have an impact on how you feel. So when it comes to light, great light really depends on a few things. One of them is it's perceived by its direction and color. If you didn't know, each light has its own temperature or color that is associated with it. Um, it is dimensionalizing in the way that it brings depth to visuals. Um, there's not always like one good time or type of light, but a lot of people really like the golden hour to take photos or to film things because it has a very warm feeling to it. And light has a both technical and emotional aesthetic quality that really impacts your audience and you. So for instance, if you look at this, this image was taken during golden hour, and it has this warm, you know, welcoming feeling to it. Even though that's cactus, you still like, oh, okay, yeah, it's very inviting, it's very warm, it's very comfortable. Versus one that's taken in the middle of the day, the light is just bright, there's really no dimension to it. It's very different from the one you saw previously. And then even this one, the light is more of a blue tone. Um, there's still some gold aspect to it, but you get this feeling of, oh, it's moving. There's um life to this picture. When you think about filming or color of pictures or the white balance, you have to think about the temperature of it. And color temperature often refers to the various shades of a color in different light sources. So if you've ever taken a picture and it looked too orange or too blue or too green, it's because the temperature of the light changes according to what kind of lighting it is. And then that temperature and that color really impact the way that you feel towards the picture. So you can see in this photo, it's one photo that's been divided into different color temperatures, and they each have its own feeling or aesthetic to it. With light, you also get shadows. So light has a really tangible quality that you can feel, that you could almost touch because it's highlighting what is going on. Whereas shadow are just the natural resort of light, and it has a revealing sense to it because it allows the light to give direction, and provide quality. So if something's very well lit, you become aware of it. If it's very dark, it almost gives an ominous feeling. And so light and shadow go hand in hand. And next week we'll talk about contrast, and contrast with light and shadow also go hand in hand. So for instance, if you look at this picture of this professor, um, the one on the right is okay. It still displays kind of the same things that he's trying to do in the picture on the left, but it's bright. It shows all of the things going on. It's a little bit cluttered. Whereas the light and shadow changes the dynamic of the picture, right? And yes, there isn't all of the mess behind him and everything, but they're just a different quality to each picture and how you feel about them. Same with this one. This is a screenshot of a movie. The light and shadow create this ambiance, right? We can see that he's hiding behind a window or a door of some sort, and he's looking in, and you only see bits and pieces of what's going on. If it was all well lit, you wouldn't get this feeling of spying that you do with this. When you think about light, you can use light very strategically. Magazines are really good at this. A lot of movie directors are really good at this. But when you do that, sometimes it's called guiding light. And this is a strategic placement of light and shadow that provides the viewer a direction. Basically, it tells you how to look at a photo and where to directly look. And it can really create this type of movement in a photo. So for instance, if you look here, the light is directed onto the white petals. And so you get this contrast with the white and the black and the greens, but it also directs you right to the petals with the dew on it, right? Versus if the lighting was slightly altered, it could highlight something completely different. This is a wedding photo that I took. And you can see here that the guided light really takes you to her forehead where he's giving her a kiss, and everything else is black and white, or black, sorry. And so it's guiding you to that very special moment, right? There's also this photo that I took at Disneyland, and the light is really bringing you to look at the ship that was on the rivers of America, and it's just guiding you to it, right? Versus if it was just all well lit, it would still be an okay picture, but this really gives you this ambiance of you know what's going on in the scene. When you think about contrast, and we'll go more in depth in this later, but contrast is the point of what is lit and what is not lit. And we get contrast not only with light and in pictures, but with characters and locations and different points of the story. And so when you use light and color to create contrast to go with the story or the character, it really just brings out a whole new level of storytelling. Contrast in a technical sense really does not exist without light, because you can't change the contrast of what's going on if you don't have that. And even when you think about like character or story plot, you have light and dark, and without the difference between them, you don't have a story. So with that, I want to play this little clip about using light to tell stories and how important it is. And then we're going to go into composition.
Story, story, story. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how good something looks. What matters is how well it tells a story. So today we're going to go over 7 simple concepts on how to tell your story through lighting. Now, before I get into this, what I'm going to talk about is not absolute. You'll be able to find examples that have done the exact opposite of any of these techniques, because what I'm going to talk about are trends in the cinematic language. Lighting techniques that, while they have been used and thought about countless times, they are not the only way to accomplish an effect. So, let's do this. Tip 1. Make importance shine. Now, this tip is an important one because of how fundamental and practical it is. The concept is simple. The eye is drawn to the brightest part of any frame, so if something is important, make sure your lighting communicates that. Now, this can be anything from a character's face to a shiny missing key on the floor. Remember, guys, film moves fast. And if you need your audience to see something, know that making it brighter than anything else in your frame is the easiest way to tell your audience that this is where they need to look. Tip 2. Light characters for how your protagonist sees them. Now, beyond just drawing the eye, lighting can also tell an audience about how your protagonist feels about that character. Is this the love interest of your film? Are they an absolute angel? Try giving them a glowing soft light or even an edge light that makes them glow. Is your villain lurking in the dark? Put them there with just enough light to see the evil in their eyes. Even if there isn't a clear protagonist in the film, lighting can be used to foreshadow a character's effect and overall motives in that film. Now, obviously, you can invert these expectations later. It is, after all, storytelling, but the key takeaway here is to make the decision in the first place. Tip 3. Choose the light or dark side. Even if your story doesn't have clear heroes or villains, lighting can be used to separate or delineate between sides. In Shawshank Redemption, we can see this in the rooftop drinking scene where all the prisoners are lit together in beautiful frontal daylight. They're having fun drinking, while our one character sits alone by himself and is the only character that is backlit. In this case, the difference in lighting is separating our protagonist from his peers and tells the audience that he is not sharing in that same moment. Lighting separation doesn't always have to be gloomy though. We'll often see the same kind of backlighting used for multiple characters to bring them out from the back. This halo effect can make two people look as though they're united against everyone else, or better yet, in a romantic world of their own. Next tip. Go soft for soft moments. Now, one of the easiest ways to tell story through lighting is by matching the quality of light used to the emotional impact of that scene. Now, since soft light is just how it sounds, a kind of light that makes for soft shadows and soft illumination, it is best to use this kind of lighting for scenes where characters are joyful or feeling emotionally fulfilled. Now, likewise, since hard lighting emphasizes rough textures and creates hard shadows, this quality of lighting is best used to communicate difficult or dark times. And for those of you that don't know how to distinguish between hard and soft lighting, we'll put a link in the bio for our videos that explain those too. Next tip, use color to push emotion. Now, this one can get a little bit abstract, but the concept is simple again. One way to tell story through lighting is by using colors that communicate how an audience should feel about that scene. For starters, and to hit the essentials, remember that warm tones like orange, amber, and straw tend to make us feel connected, intimate, and nostalgic. While cool tones like blue, cyan, tend to make audiences feel cool and detached. Now, for going beyond those two color tones and going a little bit more stylized, just take a moment to think about how a color feels before implementing it. For an easy example, I'm sure all of us can remember a time where a saturated red has been used to emphasize urgency, passion, or danger in a scene. Next tip, move lights for chaos. In addition to matching the quality of your light, you can also try matching the motion of your light to the action of your scene. Is your scene chaotic where your protagonist is running away from danger? Try to emphasize that chaos by adding a spiraling flash of police sirens, or maybe even the flashlights of an ominous search party. On the other end, if your scene is becoming more romantic, perhaps a slow lighting fade can help show your audience how deeply your character cares about that love interest. How in their world, their love interest is the only person that they can see, both literally and figuratively. And for our last tip, light only as far as your character can see. An easy way to ground your audience with the protagonist is by showing them only what that character can see. In horror films, this technique is most iconic with the light of a scene extending only halfway down that ominous hallway or only halfway down the descent into a dark basement. But on the flip side, lighting depth in an environment can show how open and free a character feels. To go even beyond this technique, you can use limited lighting more abstractly to communicate how a character feels about a situation. So there you have it. There's 7 tips on how to tell story through lighting, but let's open it up to you guys.
Light plays a very, very, very important part in storytelling. What also plays an important part is composition. And what is composition? Well, It's the arrangement of your subject, or more abstractly, the lines and shapes within a frame. So when you take a photo, you can always take a photo with the person or the subject in the middle. Nothing wrong with that, but it lacks meaning, right? If every picture we ever saw just showed something in the middle, we wouldn't really have a story to tell. It'd just be a picture of something. Um, Alongside composition, light, and composition play together, and they convey contextual understanding. So not only does light create emotion, but so does composition. And they work together to create effective meaning for your audience. In a way, composition tells your viewer where to look and how to feel. So how do you do this? Well, one of the ways you can do this is with rule of thirds. And this is simply how you set up your shot. And it's really using what we call a grid to specifically place people or your subject in a shot that is aesthetically pleasing. There are horizontal and vertical lines that meet together on the third of a frame or the way that your picture is set up. And then you want to place the subject in those frames. So if you can't visualize that, this is what it kind of looks like. So here's this picture of a windmill out in the middle of the field, and you can see that it's pulled slightly to the left and not just in the middle. What happens is if you place this grid onto your photo, the windmill lines up and hits on the third or the connecting dots of this grid. And it's just a very aesthetically pleasing aspect. Painters really used this in the 17th century when they would paint landscapes, to really just bring out where your eye should go, mathematically. Again, we have these cows, they're over to the left slightly. Some of the cows are hitting on these points, but you can see that they're moved into the grid, where they're not just in the middle. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but they're hitting it in certain points. This is a picture I took of one of our dogs. And again, without the grid, you can still see where he would hit. His eye would be at one of the points that you would see when the grid was on there. Another picture I took at Disneyland. Again, you have the rule of thirds. And in this one, we actually see it hit with the fireworks, the mountains, and then with the Millennium Falcon in the bottom. Along with rule of thirds, you have what's called the golden mean, the golden triangle, the golden spiral, the golden ratio, whatever you want to call it. It depends on if you're painting versus video versus photography. But basically, this is another way to guide where your subject should be. And again, this is a mathematical way of thinking about viewing paintings or pictures. And there's an equation that goes into this, but basically it's this spiral. And at the end of the spiral is where your subject should be. And it doesn't mean that necessarily needs to be in this position all the time. You can move it, and I'll show you that, but this gives you an idea of what it should look like. So again, you have this grid, right? And if you look at this sunset picture and you put it on there, the sunset kind of gathers right below where that should be. And so this is aesthetically pleasing to the eye when you think about it mathematically. Same concept here, another picture took at Disneyland. Sorry for that. I do a lot of study at Disneyland. But you can see that that golden mean is turned around and it hits right around where the balloon is. It doesn't have to be exact, but it gives you the idea of where you should place your subject. Similarly, again, here is a rock in a national park. It's a monument. It's right on that spiral. Along with rule of thirds, and hitting these lines in this golden spiral ratio idea, you can have physical lines that are represented within your photo or your video. And lines actually have implied meaning to them. So whether they are vertical or horizontal can mean different things, but an implied line also constructs a type of linear element, right? So if it feels like there should be a line there, that's okay as well. One of the other things that you can think about is creating a pathway with lines. This is also called leading lines when you think about photography. And it basically walks the viewer or your audience into the subject and where they should look. It also hits primary interest points. And so when you use lines and the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, you create these very aesthetic, pleasing photos that lead you right to where you should look. So, for example, these lines in the photo on the left of the water flowing down a river, they tell you where the water is going, where it's hitting, and it leads you right to where you should look. Same with these wildflowers. The line leads you to the bud and kind of extends up into the mountain as well. When you think about the meaning of lines, horizontal lines imply a calmness or stability. Vertical lines imply strength and power, sometimes even boundaries. And then you have diagonal lines, which imply action, instability, or excitement. So here we have a horizontal line. It's very calming. We get the horizontal lines of the tide in the water, of the bridge. But the vertical lines of the buildings show that the city has this prominence, right? Here we see a worker going up a um, tall ladder on an industrial piece of equipment. And it's very imposing, right? Because you can see how tall it is. You can see that he's on a rope safety contraption. And so there's this sense of power and urgency to that. Here you have pathways created by the light from a wedding photo that I took. The lights in the background are leading you to the center to look at her dress that is highlighted. Again, here, these lines create a visual aesthetic. This is taken in Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland. And it just shows you one that it's, busy and an area of their quote unquote town, but it also creates this feeling of like closedness, right? Safety. When you are creating pathways in a photo, you want to make sure that you usually have one, maybe two subjects with a background. Any other kind of creates too much focus to try to direct your audience to. But if you have primary interest points, creating pathways really helps to guide the eye to the subject. So for instance, here you have different lines. You have the mountains, right? Creating these diagonal dynamics. And then you have the river running that creates its own line. And it tells you kind of where the flow of the photo goes. This is a picture of my oldest son when he was turning 1. And you have lots of lines in this as well, right? You have the lines of the bridge that are going vertically to show support for the bridge. You have the lines leading away from him and where he's going on it to help like guide you to where he is in the center. And you have the bridge itself, which is creating a pathway. Another fun compositional element that you can use is called framing. And this also helps you put a primary interest into the photograph. Um, Lots of things can create a frame within a picture, um, including a frame. But what it does is it points a virtual figure at what is most important. They can be very subtle or they can be very in your face. And frames are the most powerful when they're revealing a facet of the story. So here you have the framing of um, the trees that are showing the mountains. You have the framing of the river at the bottom that reflects the mountains. Here, of a wedding photo I took, you have the framing of the bride within the door frame, but you also have frames within the windows. And then you have the frame of the actual barn doors, but they're all leading you to look at the bride. The lighting and the contrast also helps with this. Here, the buildings and the trees frame the landmark. You also have leading lines of the cars at the bottom showing you that the traffic is going away from the car or from the building. And here you have the frame of the little girl. She was playing with drapes, and you can see it's framing her so that you go to her instantly, but it's also creating like this action, right, if we're pulling them back. The last thing I want to talk about today, and we'll finish compositional elements next week, but is how to cautiously approach centering your subject and what that means visually. So the only time that you really should center something in the middle of a screen or a picture is when it really has a great significance and really needs to be strongly positioned. So for instance, this is a photo by Dr. Foster. It's of an oil rig, and it's the prominent place is in the center, right under this rainbow, right after it rained. If you moved it, it would still give you this effect, but it wouldn't be as dramatically pleasing, right? Because it would be right under the rainbow. Same goes for this picture I took at Disneyland. This is the partner statue. It's in the very end of Main Street, right in front of the castle, and it's just significant in the fact that it's Walt Disney and Mickey Mouse. But I put it right in the center because it's the most important thing. You have the framing on the side of the trees as well, and then you have leading lines at the bottom. So all of these things really create visually appealing photos, videos, art. And without them, your storytelling isn't as impactful or meaningful to your audience.